It's good. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about an amazing trip that I took last year in September and October. My husband and I flew from here to Paris, and we spent a week in France getting acclimatized to the time and the fact that it was fall instead of spring. And then we embarked on an amazing walk along a very ancient pilgrim pathway called the Camino Francis. Now, the Caminos run all over Spain and parts of France as well. We chose the Camino Francis because it is the best supported of all the Caminos, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. You can see there, I've included a map showing the Camino Francis. It starts in France at a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is right on the French-Spanish border on the wrong side of the Pyrenees. So we didn't start there because we didn't want to spend our first 2 or 3 days climbing over mountains. So we started in Leon, which you probably can see, or I can point it out to you. It is about halfway along. That was about 320 kilometers from our final destination, which was Santiago de Compostela. I thought a lot about this trip before we did it and why I wanted to do it. In my case, it was really a spiritual journey, and a spiritual journey in a way. It's not about a relic, because there is a relic in Santiago de Compostela, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. It's not about the relic, it was about the journey and how the journey might change me. But I had read a book back in the 1980s about a very intrepid person who walked the Camino back in 1976. And back in those days, it was not known as a pilgrimage or even now it's sort of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's massive, but back then it was quite small. If you found places to stay, it would be in a barn or something, and people had a sort of a secret code that they would put a picture of a scallop shell over a doorway where you were welcome to just sort of throw your sleeping bag down and spend the night. It's not like that now. But I was intrigued by that. I was intrigued by the idea of an amazing journey that you explored a different country, but also kind of explored yourself and the limits of what you could do. I also later, and even here, have met so many people who have done a Camino. You sort of say, I'm thinking about doing a Camino. And they're like, I did that 3 years ago. It was great. Or my cousin did that and they loved it. Or there was this whole chain of people who would say, my brother did it and he loved it so much, he'll have coffee with you and tell you all about it. I mean, there's just an amazing group of people who have done it and would love to tell you about it. And now here I am telling you about it. So it was on the bucket list. It was something different. But we decided last year, I turned 65, Michael turned 65, actually the morning we got to Paris. And we thought, well, it's now, and otherwise it might be never. So we decided that we were going to walk on this amazing journey. And as I said, we started out in France. And the reason that we started out in France, one of the reasons, was I wanted to keep a promise that I had made to my English family. Now, my mother's maiden name was Whitaker, and this is the grave of her brother, Sergeant Joseph Francis Whitaker. And he was killed in World War II. He was a on a Wellington bomber. He was an air gunner, 20 years old. And the plane went down in France at a little town called Pied-les-Guines. You can see a picture of him there. Nobody in my family had ever gone to his grave. And I wanted to go and pay my respects. And as far as everything that happened all along the Camino, this thing, even before we started, was one of the most amazing and moving things that I did. Because, as you can see, that's a war graves, Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery in this tiny town. It's beautifully maintained. Every grave is cared for. And I think it's a testament to the strength of the French, who are in charge of taking care of those people who are English and Italian and some French people, but mostly not. And the fact that that grave is still there, and it's a remembrance to all of us how awful war is and how young people, young men especially, die. But then we were on to the next part. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Camino. Really revolves around a martyr who was a follower of Jesus. His name was St. James. He was an apostle. He was the son of Zebedee and the brother of John. He died. We don't know exactly how. There are myths and legends and stories about all the apostles and how they died. But he died, and then something miraculous happened. His body was transported to a field in Spain 800 years ago. No, 800 years after, and 800 years after he died, he was found by a shepherd named Peleo. This was in the 9th century AD, during the reign of King Alfonso II. I don't know how he got there. There's stories about boats and angels and miracles, and it's interesting. However he got there, after his body was discovered and identified as St. James, they built a church there. And then later they built a bigger church, and then a city grew up around it. The city is called Santiago de Compostela. Compostela means field of stars, and it has to do with the fact that a star led the shepherd to find the body. Santiago merely means St. James in Spanish. So Camino de Santiago means way of St. James. And that's how it got its name, and the relic, or relics of the body, are still in the cathedral of Santiago. But I didn't go to see relics. So the pilgrimage was very, very popular in the Middle Ages. Thousands and thousands of people went every year. And then during the Reformation, it kind of died down a bit, and very few people went. It fell into disuse, almost disappeared. But then, since the 1990s, when the Camino was made a World Heritage Site, it has just exploded in popularity again. So there were 500,000 people in 2024, 500,000 people who walked some or all of one of the Caminos last year, and I was one of those people. So this picture I took on the path somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where it is now, but it's what's called a holloway or a sunken lane. It was created by thousands and thousands and thousands of feet walking on that path and wearing it away. And you can see it's a good 2 meters below ground level. So that tells you a little bit about the devotion of the people who wanted to see the relic and make the journey. But it also tells you that, for Catholics at least, there's a reward at the end of it. Because as a Catholic, if you walked the Camino and you went back to your home church and you carried your scallop shell with you, which was the sort of the proof that you'd done it, you got a dispensation that sort of forgave your sins and meant you could go straight to heaven. So there was a pretty powerful incentive to do this Camino pilgrimage. Today, I don't think that's as important, although the line in the Camino office at Santiago de Compostela is always right around the block with people still wanting that Compostela or dispensation, but I think a lot of people just frame it these days and put it on their wall. So there's me and Michael, my husband. That's us at just about almost at the beginning. We've just walked out of Leon. We've got 300 kilometers to go at this point. And he made this into just a tiny movie. He carried a camera with him every day. And edited all that together in a movie. So here we are leaving Leon. I will not bore you with lots and lots of talk during this this little film, but it will give you, I think, a good idea of what it was like. We passed so many beautiful cathedrals and so many beautiful Spanish houses. All along the way, and it is called the way for most people, there are lines, cockle shells, golden arrows. It's pretty hard to get lost. You could if you tried hard enough, but most of the time, if you're paying attention, you will find your way out of a city. There's a sign. There's quite a few of those as well. Out of a city, into the countryside, and then across Spain. It was a lovely day today, our first day. We were very encouraged by that. The weather did not stay so nice all the way through, as you'll see. So we are crossing the plains outside of Leon. They are very flat. It was quite warm, but we kept going. One of the nice things about walking the Camino, as opposed to maybe walking something like this in New Zealand, is there is, almost without fail, a village about every 3 kilometers, and that village will have a bathroom and a place to sit down and have something to drink or something to eat. But when you're in the middle of a place like this, you're really wishing for that place to sit down. Our schedule, we got going about 8:30. We walked for about 3 hours. We had lunch, a rest, and then we walked for 2 or 3 hours more. We were covering about 20 to 25 kilometers a day, which, I don't know, doesn't sound like much, but it was quite tiring. And one thing that I learned was that when you're 65, even if you're in decent shape, if you go walking 25 kilometers a day, you're going to get really tired after about day 3. Not helped by me also having a cold, which I picked up on the airplane or in France. And the first 4 days, I was actually really pretty sick. Another absolutely gorgeous church. There's me. There's my good old pink pack, and there is the hat. And I want to talk about the hat a bit. You can see the hat down there. It's quite an unusual hat. And I made so many friends on the Camino by wearing that hat because it was absolutely unmistakable. And people would come up to me and say, I saw you in Astorga. You had that hat on. Or you're the lady with the hat. And I was like, that's me. And by the end of the 3 weeks, it was almost like the hat had its own fan club. People were, like, oh, it's the hat. Wave. This is one of the places we stayed. It's a beautiful old ranch. There's me in the hat. We had a lot of cold and rainy weather. We didn't realize when we started out that the beginning of October is the beginning of the wet season in Galicia, in Spain. So it was very cold and very wet for many of the following days, as you can see. The thing about you take on a trip like this, you have to keep going. We had made bookings for the entire trip, so we had a different hotel to stay in every night, and we could have taken a taxi from one place to the next, but we thought that was cheating, so we didn't do that. We walked every day, rain or shine, usually about 20 kilometers. That was a very typical Camino lunch, a thing called a Spanish tortilla, which is not a tortilla, it's an omelet made with potatoes. And it was delicious. So we're about halfway through now. Ocebrero is on top of a mountain. That was our longest day and definitely the hardest day. That was 32 kilometers from our place that we spent the night up to the top of Ocebrero. A lot of it was a gentle climb, but then towards the end, it got a bit steeper. It was, thank heavens, a nice day. That's us stopping for coffee, just getting our strength back for this very, very, very long climb. And you see here that a lot of the Camino is actually next to roadsides. In many places, it is sheltered off the road, but sometimes you just have to walk on the road and be a bit careful. Heading up the hill further and further, getting pretty tired at this point. But again, you have no choice but to keep going, so you just keep going. And one of the other things that I learned by doing the Camino is that you actually can keep going even after you think you can't keep going because you have to. These people were smart because they had started a business where they would take you up to Ocebrero on horseback. And I was really sad that I hadn't signed up for that because we ended up having to walk all the way. And towards the end, we were stopping about every 15 minutes because we were just absolutely so tired. But we made it. Here we are at the top, tramping our way, finding our accommodation. And when we got to the accommodation, oh no, a little bit further yet, a little bit further. Kept looking at the map and saying, how much further is it? But eventually, we got there. It has anti-shake technology in it. This is where we stayed in Ocebrero. The woman took one look at us and said, here's your key, go lay down, I'll talk to you later. So that's what we did. And then leaving the next day. It was not such a nice day. Very foggy, very cold. You can see that the landscape changes as we get up into the mountains. It's a lot of you have probably done a lot of tramping. I haven't, but there's the very famous statue of the pilgrim. I wasn't used to walking so far. I'm pretty fit, but not just like day after day after day. And I found that really the hardest part was just to keep going. This is a typical town in Galicia. There are cow buyers under all the houses, and then the main street is used for the cows to go up and down, and then they send them out into the fields during the day. That was quite different than anything I'd ever seen before. But one of the things that has been a real blessing about the Camino for all the towns that it passes through is there's been really a lot of rural population in Spain. As you can see there are plenty of abandoned buildings. But in the places that the Camino goes through, they have enough people passing through with enough money that they can keep going by offering various services. So it really is quite an amazing gift to Spain from the rest of the world, the people who walk this amazing pathway. And there's a whole bunch of volunteers that keep the paths open and keep it in a tidy condition. Now, I'm going to talk for a minute about Sarria. Sarria is 120 kilometers away from Santiago de Compostela. If, and I know you all do, want to go and walk the Camino, if you want to get your Compostela, your forgiveness paper, you have to walk at least the bit from Sarria to Santiago de Compostela. So you have to commit to walking 120 kilometers. And one thing that you'll see in this next 4 or 5 days worth of video footage is that there are many more people now who are just doing this very last bit. You get the same piece of paper either way, but I was glad that we'd started sooner. And this also is when the weather really turned very nasty. So it was pretty much rain all day. But the really cool thing about that hat is that it is waterproof. So it's like wearing an umbrella on your head. So it was really actually very handy for that. I had so many people ask me where I got it from. Oh, so wet. It was so wet. Where did I get it from? The internet, of course. It's made by a company in Seattle, Washington called Kabu. And it's a particular model of hat called a chilba. And I'll explain to you what it does when we just get done with our wee movie here. So coming up, you can see this is a very typical Spanish village. There will be a place to sit down and eat. Some places on the Camino, there were volunteer organizations that had places with free food called donativos, where you could sit and rest and have a cup of coffee or a piece of fruit just for a donation. They were really invaluable. But one thing I'll warn you about, for those of you who are going to do the Camino, there are no public restrooms anywhere on the Camino. And so if you want to use the restroom, which of course everybody needs to, probably 3 or 4 times a day, you have to go to one of the lovely cafes or al fresco it. So here we are outside one of the hotels. That's the beginning of the day. It's a nice day, so we're both smiling. You can see that black box on my husband's chest there. That's the camera, and it attaches to his clothing. He's so proud of it. Attaches to his clothing with a magnet, and it has image stabilization. Oops, sorry. I think yes, I've passed. That's okay. We'll keep going. Nope. So it had image stabilization, and that meant that it didn't look like it was bouncing up and down as he was walking. He had about, close to 30 hours of video footage, and he very painstakingly and sweetly edited all that down to about 12 minutes for me. So that picture of the inside of the church, that is the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela. That is where St. James's relics are. There was a long line to see the relics and sort of touch the box, so we didn't do that. But if you look quite closely, I'll come and point it out. One of the things that the service, they hold a service every day for the pilgrims, that is a huge incense burner that is lowered and swung from a pulley way, way up at the top of the church. And every day, when they have the pilgrim service, they fill it full of incense and swing it back and forth across all the pilgrims in the church in order to give them the holy incense of Santiago de Compostela. So, I won't keep you much longer. I want to tell you a little bit about what I learned on the Camino. I've mentioned a couple of things. One is that if you're 65, your feet hurt all the time. Another one is you get really tired, but you can keep going surprisingly long after that. We didn't schedule enough rest days because we thought we would just be able to, 15, 20 kilometers. We can do that every day. You can't. Don't do that. The one thing that I learned is that good plain food, which you get a lot of that on the Camino because most places you say will have a pilgrim dinner, and it's inevitably some kind of potato, some kind of roast meat, and some kind of salad or vegetable. And at the end of the day, you are so hungry that it's delicious every single night, doesn't matter what it is. The other thing that I learned is that there are a lot of amazing people in the world, and there are people who have dedicated their lives to taking care of the pilgrims who walk on the Camino de Santiago. And they are wonderful, kind people who every day during the walking season, which doesn't really end, but honestly, between about April and October, it's just very, very busy all the time. There are all the volunteer people who run the albergues, which are the commercial and also civic hostels where Pellegrinos stay, but we didn't want to sleep in dormitories, so we actually booked with a company that got us hotel rooms every night. So in a way, you could say I haven't actually had the proper Camino experience because I haven't been woken up by a snoring German at 2 o'clock in the morning. We had nice rooms with nice beds and our own bathrooms, but if I had to do it again, I'd do it just the same way, to be honest. Now I found this quote from Rumi, who, if you know me, you know is my favorite poet. It's your road and yours alone. Others may walk it with you, but no one can walk it for you. And funnily enough, that was exactly what I found out from the Camino, is that if you want to walk, if you want to do a pilgrimage, you and no one else can put one foot in front of the other and walk that pilgrimage. Other people can tell you about it, and you can walk with other people, and people can take care of you, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's doing it. And that was an important lesson for me to learn, probably the most important lesson. And when we got done, we walked into Santiago de Compostela. It was a beautiful day. We stopped at in the cathedral square, and there were lots of other pilgrims there, everybody going, "Yay, we made it, we made it." We did that too. And we both looked at each other and we're like, this is great, but we're never doing it again. No way. But then, strangely enough, I don't know, about a month went by, and I was like, well, we only did 300 kilometers, and there's still another 380 kilometers to go. We could go back and do some more. And the only thing I can think of, and some of the ladies here will understand what I mean when I say it's like childbirth. You have a baby and you think, ugh, never doing that again. But then you remember all the good things, and suddenly you want to do it again. And so we are planning to have another go at the Camino, probably from Burgos to Leon, which would be about another 300 kilometers later on this year. So that's it for the pictures. I'll just tell you just a tiny bit about the gear, and then I'll answer questions if there are any. So, two things that you need for the Camino is a hat. And this hat, as I said, is waterproof, shady, has a mesh insert on the inside. So when it goes on your head, it sort of fits like this, so pretty straight up and down. And the wind blows through, and it keeps you really, really cool. And the inside is black, and so it doesn't reflect.
Can you use the mic because I'm recording it?
Oh, sorry. Okay, hang on. I'll take this.
This helps for those who aren't here.
Yep. So the hat was really popular. Hat was super popular with everybody. The other thing you need, walking poles, because some of the track is really rough. You might see most people took 2, some people just took 1. I found 2 to be absolutely essential. My husband, because he's such a contrarian, took none. But, and he was fine, to be fair. The other thing that you will bring with you or get on your way is a scallop shell. Every pilgrim carries a scallop shell to show that they are pilgrims, even though half the time you can tell they are because they look really tired and they're a bit grubby, and they've got a pack and 2 sticks. So that is my Camino story. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It'll be a lot. It's going to be more of the same, but I can talk about, different, hopefully talk about some different aspects of it. Yeah. But yeah. It is true that you really don't care so much about personal hygiene after a while because you're wearing the same clothes that you wore yesterday, and they got wet yesterday, and today they're also wet, and you're a little bit smelly. Most people don't carry more than a couple of pairs of socks and maybe a T-shirt and another T-shirt to change into. So, yeah, you don't want to carry anything that you don't want, and that is also part of what it means to go on a pilgrimage is to shed things. And you can find things all along the Camino that people have decided that they don't want anymore for one reason or another. Yes?
Did you meet people that you'll keep in contact with?
Yes. Only a few, though, because we were with an organized, I guess, group, and we were moving at a different rate than many of the other people who were walking 30 kilometers every day. And so we did meet people and we did walk with them, but then we would be like, oh, sorry, we're stopping here because we're old. And they'd be like, okay, see you down the road. But you'd never see them again because they got ahead of you. And then they were done well before you were. But we were, the pace that we were on was really about all we could do. In fact, I said it was actually next time, we will build more rest days in. So you have a sort of a cohort that starts out with you, but if you're not fast, they'll leave you behind because it's a lot of young people.
Can I just ask about your footwear? Because I presume it's very important.
There are a lot of forums on the internet about the Camino de Francis and all the Caminos, and there are threads and threads and threads and threads about footwear. And everybody, you'd see everything from, like hiking boots right down to sandals. And Crocs. I saw Crocs at one point. Everybody wears something different. My experience, based on what I wore last time, which is a pair of Haka shoes with ankle support, they were waterproof, so Gore-Tex. They were not the right shoe. Because because they had the membrane in them, they would keep your feet dry for a while, but if you're walking all day, it doesn't matter how good your shoes are. Your feet are still going to get wet, and they just wouldn't get dry. They were so hard to dry out, even stuffing them with towels and newspapers. So for this one, I have bought it. I love Hoka shoes. They are great shoes, very comfortable. I have bought a smaller, lighter pair of Hokas that are not waterproof. So that would be my recommendation. A very light, very easily dried, just athletic shoe is what you need. If you have sticks, you don't need ankle support. Yeah. The hotels did that we stayed in. If you stay in one of the hostels, there's no heating. You have to carry a sleeping bag. There's no bedding either, and you're in a bunk with whoever is on top of the bunk, or if you're on the top, who's ever on the bottom. So it's a much more communal experience, and a lot of people, that's what they really like about it. As I said, us not so much, but if you wanted to do a proper Camino, then you would do that. And you don't plan how far you're going to go. You just keep walking until you can't walk anymore. You find a village, find an albergue, and get a room. And the rooms are about the donation or 5 or 10 euros a night. It is a very inexpensive way to see Europe, which is why a lot of people do it. Yes, Yun. Some were. I mean, you would often talk to people, and they would say, I don't know why I'm doing this, I just felt called to do it. And to me, that says, yes, that's a spiritual journey, and you'll know at the end why you were called to do it. Other people are just like, hey, it's a cheap way to, see a lot of Spain, and, the food's really cheap, and the places to stay are really cheap. All of the pilgrim meals, in addition to having, as I said, some French fries or roast potatoes, piece of meat, and salad, comes with a bottle of wine per person for 10 euros. And so maybe a lot of people just went for the wine. I'm not really sure. But we constantly left 3/4 of a bottle of wine each every night, because if I'd drunk a bottle of red wine, there'd be no way I'd be walking the next day. So we were a bit judicious, but many people loved that, the food and the drink part of it. Any more questions? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. I don't know. We visited quite a few World War I sites in France, because that's a place that's particularly of interest to my husband. But it seems as though pilgrimages in general are really, and it probably because of the success of the Caminos, it's really having a resurgence in the 21st century, which is fantastic. There's even some here in New Zealand. So there is a book, I haven't bought it yet, about pilgrimages in New Zealand, but I'll bring it when I buy it, and we can have a chat about what's in New Zealand. Yeah. There's markers and shrines all over the place. Thank you for listening to me. Oh my gosh.
I've read a book. Our son and daughter-in-law gave us a book. I was saying, thank you, Susan. I've read the book that our son and daughter-in-law bought us from their travels. I don't think they walked the trail, and I've been to many travel talks, but you absolutely brought it alive. And I think it's magic, whatever that thing that your husband wears on his chest, to see the movie like that. I felt as though we were walking along it without having to worry about our feet. or the toilet stop, which I thought would be a bit of a worry.
It was some places, yeah.
So, thank you very much. I
Thank
thought
you
that
all.
was wonderful, and I wonder if I could ask, could I catch a picture of, or could Cam catch a picture of you with your hat on and your sticks in front of the screen,
Okay,
so that it can go in our minutes and also in the bulletin.
Let's see if I can
I've
put
said
the
before,
screen
we're
back
lucky
again.
enough to have a graphic designer as part of the Women's Fellowship who sees that all these things happen. So please take this little gift from us.
Oh, thank you.
Sit down and watch the movie again and eat those chocolates.
I will do.
Thank you.